On this episode of What the Ship, I gotta stop. I can't even do an introduction. We're just gonna jump right into this. There's too much ship happening right now. I know I say that a lot, but this week has just been off the rails with stuff. I am literally bouncing off the wall, in case you can't tell. I'm not on anything. I'm perfectly fine, but I am this excited. I have never seen this level of attention towards shipping in the United States in my lifetime, and I've been sailing since 1989. I am really, really friggin' old. But I've been watching this a long time, and the amount of news that's happening here is just incredible. So what I want to do today is recap where we are. What's all the different legislation and issues coming out of the Trump administration right now? What is going on with global shipping that's impacting this? Because we got a lot of movements going on. We got ports being sold. We have a whole batch of sanctions and issues going on. We're going to recap that all in What the Ship, because that's what we do. We recap all the major stories. First off, if you're new to the channel, hey, how about subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come on. So my week started with this.
To boost our defense industrial base, we are also going to resurrect the American shipbuilding industry, including commercial shipbuilding and military shipbuilding. And for that purpose, I am announcing tonight that we will create a new Office of Shipbuilding in the White House and offer special tax incentives to bring this industry home to America where it belongs. We used to make so many ships. We don't make them anymore very much.
Office of Shipbuilding. I am so excited. I'm sorry. Listen, I know Trump is polarizing. I got that. I understand that entirely. And to be clear, if Trump said that, if Biden said that, if I don't care what president said it, I would still be in the same mood I am. I'm excited. I am excited that shipbuilding is getting attention. The Office of Shipbuilding is within the National Security Council, a 5-person office. I know who's already in it. I know who's staffing it. There's some great people I know that's in that office. It's being headed by a young staffer who's the director of this. I have very high hopes. Maybe that's being naive in some ways, but I am hoping that we see some action out of this. So let's go ahead and break this down. So we have this announcement of an Office of Shipbuilding. Then we have this: Trump's preparing an executive order to strengthen U.S. shipbuilding. Now, this executive order has been out in the mainstream. I've read versions of it already. It got sent to me multiple times. I actually talked to somebody in the office. They're like, how'd you get it? It's like, it's not how I got it. It's how many of them I got. It is out there, and it's entitled basically Making Shipbuilding Great Again. But in it is a lot. And I'm not going to talk about what's in it right now because they're still working on that draft. But once that comes out, what it does entail is a lot of organizations, a lot of departments within the U.S. government doing studies and taking actions. And if I have a concern about the executive order right now, is it's asking to do a lot very quickly without really having one person or agency overseeing it. I think there really needs to be some oversight and issues about it. And for everybody asking me if I've gotten a phone call about this, I haven't. I haven't gotten a phone call. I haven't gotten an email. I haven't. I'm just sitting here in beautiful North Carolina, just very excited about this. All right, let's continue on here. So the U.S. is going to levy fees on China-linked ships, push allies to do the same, the draft executive order says. This is from Jonathan Sull over at Reuters. The other element you have here is the Ships for America Act. Now, I did a whole video on it. I'll have it linked below here and up above so that you can go see it. But the Ships for America Act has been sponsored by Senators Kelly from Arizona, a Democrat, and Senator Young from Indiana, a Republican. But it also includes people like Representative Garamendi from California, former Congressman Waltz from Florida, Republican. He's now the National Security Advisor. Just a quick reminder what the Ships for America Act is going to do. It's going to establish the position of a maritime security advisor. There's going to be an interagency maritime security board. It will implement a national maritime strategy. It establishes a maritime security trust fund. It has a plan to increase the U.S. international fleet by 250 ships in 10 years by creating what's called the Strategic Commercial Fleet Program. It's going to establish a rulemaking committee on commercial maritime regulations and standards. It's going to require that government-funded cargo be moved on U.S. vessels and require a portion of commercial goods imported from China to be moved on U.S. vessels. It's talking about a 25% investment tax credit for shipbuilding, transforming the Title 11 Shipbuilding Federal Ship Financing Program and the Shipbuilding Financial Incentive Program. It's going to establish U.S. Center for Maritime Innovation across the country, and everything from maritime and shipbuilding recruiting campaign, a merchant marine career retention program, improving the infrastructure at the U.S. Merchant and Marine Academy, which is in poor shape, supporting the state maritime academies, centers for excellence for domestic maritime workforce training and education, and also streamline and modernize the Coast Guard Merchant Marine credentialing system. Just on that last one alone, to give you an idea, to get your Merchant Marine credentials, you got to go through the U.S. Coast Guard, which is in the Department of Homeland Security. That is akin for an airline pilot to go to the U.S. Air Force to get their license. You know, they don't. They go to the FAA. The FAA is the regulatory body. It's the one that oversees aviation. Maritime Administration oversees commercial shipping in the U.S. They should do it. The problem is DHS doesn't want the job. Coast Guard doesn't want the job. MARAD doesn't want the job. Nobody wants this job, and that's one of the big problems. But this program is setting up to be pushed through Congress. I think it's going to get a lot of traction. So, Shipbuilding Executive Order, Ships for America. Then you obviously have what's going on with tariffs. Did a whole video on this with the Trump tariff plan on implementing tariffs. We just saw this week that tariffs went into effect with Canada and Mexico, a 25% tariff, only 10% on Canadian energy, although we just saw a delay on the tariffs regarding the automobile and automotive parts sector, and then not a 10%, but a 20% tariff going on in China. Now, the tariffs were the center of attention out on the West Coast at the TPM conference. I just did a video on that. You see this story here from Bloomberg. Tariff earthquake sends shipping executives into crisis mode. Let me be clear. Everything sends shipping executives into crisis mode. In the video I did, we talked about Soren Toff's talk out at the TPM conference, Trans-Pacific Maritime Conference, held out in Long Beach. Toff, the head of Mediterranean Shipping Company, MSC, talked about the fact of what this entails. I think they're screaming a little bit loud. I don't think it's going to have the impact quite what he said. I think it has a big impact, don't get me wrong. It's going to be a massive one. But Toff was talking about the idea that we're going to see shipping cut down in the United States. It's not going to happen. I think it's going to be a lot of jockeying. I think what the shipping executives are worried about is their profitability, which is what they're always. This story over at Reuters, Jonathan Saul, another great person to follow right now on this. Jonathan is doing a fantastic job over at Reuters. There's a whole team at Reuters that are doing shipping news right now. It's amazing. You used to have shipping desks at all the major news outlets. That went away, but now all of a sudden Reuters has stood up a shipping platform, and Jonathan is one of those reporters. U.S. to levy fees on China-linked ships push allies to do likewise. So again, very much what we saw in that other article. We're trying to push for our allies to do the same thing against Chinese-built ships. Got to remember, back in 1999, only 5% of ships being built or built at the time were built in China. Today, over half of the world's ships being built are built in China. And that is creating this issue that China is going out to dominate the maritime market. They're dominating in terms of shipbuilding. They have over 61% of the order book. Some people say up to 70%. Last year, they built 51% of the ships that went into service in 2024. And that is to the detriment of the other big shipbuilding nations like Japan and Korea, our allies. And so this is creating a push, and China's shipbuilding is forcing other nations to follow suit with costs, even to the point that they're losing money. And what China is trying to do is become the dominant force in the maritime field, not just in shipbuilding, but in ship registries, in mariners out there. They build the most of the shipping containers out there in the world. They lease shipping containers out there. They control ports around there. It is a true maritime mercantilistic empire that the Chinese are developing. Then you have the U.S. Trade Representative did an extensive 301 investigation into Chinese shipbuilding and dominance in the maritime field, has now put out a request for comment on proposed changes to levy taxes and fees against Chinese shipping, and particularly they want to charge for Chinese-built ships or even companies that own Chinese-built ships to have to pay a toll coming in. I did a whole video on that where we talked about that in detail. Mike Schuller over G Captain did an extensive report on that. So if you want to read it, I'll have it linked in. So what you see here is a variety of issues all taking hold at the same time. You have the criticism from Soren Toft, the head of MSC, that these U.S. fees on Chinese-built ships will hit consumers and the smaller ports. In particularly, MSC is really exposed because about a third of their fleet is Chinese-built. And what Toft said, to kind of boil it down at the TPM conference, is, for example, ships come into the East Coast of the United States and they usually go to about 4 ports. He's saying, listen, if I'm going to get hit with $1.5 million fee every time my Chinese-built ship goes into a port, or if I'm hit with a $500,000 fee because I own a Chinese-owned ship, then what I'm going to do is, if I got to come into the U.S., I'm going to just go to 2 ports. I'm going to go from 4 to 2, which means that smaller ports or some ports are going to lose business. So if you're a small port, if you're Boston, if you're Miami, if you're Tampa, if you're New Orleans, you may lose out, because what's going to happen is the shipping companies are going to want to boil into their big, huge, massive ports. That's going to cause congestion in the big ports, because now you're going to have to get cargo out. Now, it's also an opportunity, I would argue, because if you can get some U.S. ships in there that are U.S. flagged, U.S. built, and meet the compliance of the Jones Act, or get a waiver temporarily until U.S. built ships can be done, then what you would do is what kind of China does and set up feeder service. So if foreign ships come into Savannah, if they come into New York, New Jersey, if they come into Houston, then you can have U.S. ships move cargo into the smaller ports and operate a feeder service. The problem with that is this, is you're going to double touch the containers. In other words, you're going to have 2 handlings of the containers. That's going to incur costs. You're obviously going to be using a U.S. ship. That incurs more costs. And all of this will potentially raise the cost of transportation, which in turn turns into fees and money that the consumer will pay. Now, what that means is we're about to see a big fight where it comes to shipping. This story from Bloomberg: Trump escalates the global trade war, sparking a tit for tat on tariffs. So this is the danger that's out there. Now, I should note that there are already countries that levy tariffs against us all the time. Canada is one of those ones that has a whole slew of tariffs against the United States. And, will the tariffs and these fees be just pushed onto the consumer? Yes and no. The ocean carriers right now are dealing with record profits. There are enough stories out there showing their profits from 2024. They can thank the Houthi for that. We're going to talk about that later. But they can absorb some of this. The question is going to be, what is the overall impact going forward? Now, I want to take a moment here and just reflect on a big important thing. Why is the United States doing this? Why does the United States feel like it is necessary here to impose this? And more importantly, why did the United States find itself in this position? Why does the United States find itself in a really, really bad economic position? First, this graph shows you shipbuilding tonnage by select countries. This is just within basically the last decade. You will see that China overwhelmingly dominates this trade. They have been increasing at the expense of South Korea and Japan. Those 3 nations there, China, South Korea, Japan, build about 94% of all the world ships. China right now is sitting at roughly around 63%, and then South Korea and China have about 50% split between them. South Korea more than Japan. The United States is infinitesimal. It's down to less than 0.5%. And you can see the minuscule amount of shipping we build. That's what's highlighting the issue here for the United States. But the question is, how did we get here? And what you'll hear typically from everyone, and everyone who will want to will shout this from the rooftops, is the reason we got here is because of the Jones Act. The Jones Act, the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, Section 27, cabotage. It's because of the Jones Act that got us here. And I'm going to tell you that is absolute bullshit. I'm sorry, I'm going to give you blunt language here. Let me give you the top 10 reasons that the United States finds itself in this position. We go back to World War II, and I'll take you up into the 1980s and explain exactly why the U.S. found itself in this position. Now, I should note that the U.S. Merchant Marine during World War II did yeoman service. It was massive. 733 ships sunk, nearly 10,000 merchant mariners killed. It was one of the most dangerous professions to have in World War II, is to be a merchant mariner. At the end of World War II, the services wrote their histories. The Army, for example, wrote 79 volumes of what's called the Green Book. 79 volumes of books like this. This is a big honking book. That's a lot of information in there. It's great. The U.S. Merchant Marine, for its history in World War II, got this. 81 pages. 81 pages. 733 ships sunk. You could basically put about 9 ships sunk on each page. And that is the history you got there. So the Merchant Marine was not given much credit for its service in World War II. But that's not the issue here. We're going to look at the top 10 issues that have caused the decline of the Merchant Marine. Number 10, the Ship Sales Act of 1946. The U.S. was transporting 63% of the world's ships cargo at the end of World War II. We could have sat there at the end of World War II and said, screw you all, we're going to maintain dominance over the world's oceans because we have it now. We're going to maintain it because our Merchant Marine is massive. We just built 5,777 ships from 1937 to 1945. We are the dominant maritime force. But what we did as a bargain basement price, sold 1,113 ships under the Ship Sales Act of 1946 to help repopulate our allies' merchant marines, replace them, the British, the Dutch, the Norwegians, the Greeks. We sold those ships off so that our allies could rebuild their fleet. The next thing we did is create open registries. Now, open registries came in during World War II, the Panamanian Registry, for example. During World War II, to get around Neutrality Act so we can ship high-octane fuel to the British during the early part of World War II, particularly during the Battle of Britain, we initiated open registries. Right after the end of World War II, one of our Secretaries of State, Edward Stenedis, decided to assist the nation of Liberia, one of the few free independent states in Africa at that time, with a business that they could do, and the idea was the open registry. And we've seen that. It's sometimes called flags of convenience. It has proliferated around the world, so you get states like Panama, Liberia, the Marshall Islands, which are the biggest ones, but we've seen new ones come in, particularly with the Russians and the Dark Fleet. The third thing, the Marshall Plan, 1948. So, we're going to give you all these commercial ships so that you can rebuild your merchant marine, but you're going to need shipyards. Well, that's what the Marshall Plan does. Gives you money so that you can start rebuilding your shipyards. Matter of fact, some of the modular shipyards that were built in the United States that weren't needed anymore were taken apart and shipped overseas to Japan, to Europe, to help them build their fleet. So we not only gave them ships, but now we're giving them the means by which they can rebuild their fleet. 7, the creation of the Military Sea Transportation Service in 1949. The U.S. government, the Department of Defense, created its own personal merchant marine, the Military Sea Transportation Service. This is something that the U.S. has been doing since World War I, and I would argue that it adopted the wrong principle. I've studied this extensively. This is my doctoral dissertation is on this. And one of my perceptions that happens here is that the U.S. misconceives the creation of MSTS, what is today the Military Sealift Command, and they believe they can get away with just operating in wartime environments with this military commercial fleet, when in truth, they needed the U.S. Merchant Marine. And unfortunately, what this does is further bifurcate the issue between the commercial merchant marine and the military and naval shipping, so that there is a cleave right down the middle of them, and we just don't have good relationships. Number 6, the Interstate Highway Act of 1956. If you want to know what kills the Jones Act fleet, those ships that are in the coastal trade, it's the interstate highway system. The Interstate's highway system creates what we know today is I-5, I-10, I-95, I-50, I-40. All those interstates are created through the interstate highway system. And nothing leads to the end of U.S. commercial shipping more in the coastal trade than the interstate's highway system, because you just don't need them anymore to haul cargo. Also in this period of time, 1956, we see the introduction of containerization. Next, the introduction of the DC-8 and the Boeing 707. Now you're sitting there going, Sal, what airline is important in 1958? We just saw the towing of the SS United States down to Mobile, Ford's eventual sinking off the coast of Florida. The demise of the SS United States was caused by the DC-8 and the 707, because in 1958, more people crossed the Atlantic by air than by sea. That leads to the demise of the U.S. commercial shipping passenger trade across the North Atlantic. It also does something else. It allows Americans to fly across the United States, which means that railways can now be devoted almost exclusively to moving cargo. And now the railways open up for the movement of cargo, and that becomes really important. 1962, the Colonial Pipeline. If the interstate highway system was the demise of the freighters in the Jones Act fleet, the Colonial Pipeline was the demise of the tankers in the Jones Act fleet, because now you don't need tankers to haul from Houston up along the East Coast all the way up into New York, because the Colonial Pipeline takes over for that. You can move diesel and gasoline through that method. It definitely hurts the U.S. commercial fleet. Third, the Vietnam War of 1965. Vietnam, this is a topic I tend to know a lot about for a variety of reasons, because I literally wrote the book about shipping on the Vietnam War. My Fourth Armored Defense deals specifically with this. It's my master's thesis that I did. But Guns and Butter, the Lyndon Johnson program, really was split here because, either you support the Vietnam War or you support social programs. A lot of the American money was going into new social programs, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Medicaid, Medicare, all very important for Americans. However, there was very little money left to really sustain the U.S. commercial fleet. The Vietnam War also led to the continuation use of vessels that in 1965 were 20 years old after the end of World War II. This should have been the moment when we were building a whole new fleet of vessels. There were new technologies coming in, and the U.S. missed the opportunity in 1965 to do it. Now, they do pass the Merchant Marine Act of 1970. The 1970 Act aimed to build 300 ships in 10 years, so 30 ships a year. That was the plan. There were incentives to build it with construction and operational differentials. There was expansion of the shipbuilding that can be done. You could use different types of vessels. However, one of the problems in the Merchant Marine Act of 1970 was it phased down the amount of money you can get year by year, so you tended to build more ships early and fewer ships later on. It also required ships to be locked into trade routes, which meant a lot of operators didn't want to participate in this because you have to be flexible out there on the shipping. But the thing that killed U.S. shipping more than anything else was the demise of the Merchant Marine Act of 1936, Section 5, that dealt with construction and operational differential subsidies. In 1936, Article 5, or Title 5 of the Merchant Marine Act, provided construction differentials. So if you're going to build a ship, for example, you're going to give money to the operator of the vessel to offset the building of the ship. So low interest loans, money to offset the higher cost to build in the United States. The 1970 Act gave that money directly to the shipbuilders. And then operational differentials, this allowed you to get a differential to operate a U.S. flagship in the international market. Now, we get rid of this in the 1980s and 90s. We bring it back in the late 1990s, the operational differential, under something called the Maritime Security Program, now under the Tanker Security Program. But what this meant was, in terms of building ships, you see the drop. This is a chart showing you ship construction in the United States in the mid-1970s, and you can see where it falls off a cliff. It falls off a cliff in the 1980s. Why? Because those construction differentials go away, and that shipbuilding goes across to Europe, it goes across to Japan, it will eventually go to Korea. And the only reason you see kind of spikes in there, especially in the 1990s, early 2000s, is we were building replacement tankers because of the Exxon Valdez going aground in Alaska, the requirement for double hull tankers. And literally the only ships you build today in U.S. shipyards that are commercial are those that are in the coastal trade, the Jones Act trade. And this is one of the reasons why we see a lot of criticism about the Jones Act. People will, just sit there and say, well, the Jones Act doesn't guarantee shipping in the United States. It wasn't meant to, not Section 27. The whole act was meant to ensure there was shipping in the United States. But what we did is we removed it. The construction operational differentials was a modification of the 1920 Act, and we find ourselves in the situation we are in today. All right, let's go ahead and get to our next story. So I gave you the background to how we got here, but the issue today is the shipbuilding crisis facing the United States. Story over at GCAP, Mike Schuller, Navy shipbuilding crisis. The GAO finds billions spent without strategy as fleet goals remain unmet. And what we have seen is numerous reports coming out about the issue of U.S. Navy and ship repair and shipbuilding. For example, most of the Navy's big deck amphibious vessels are not ready to go to sea, and that's a big problem. We saw a catastrophe with the sailing of the USS Boxer not too long ago, where the Boxer was sailing out of San Diego and had to return numerous times for ship repairs. And it really meant the ship did not deploy. And then don't even get me started about the Bonhomme Richard. Then we have this report from Mike Schuller, also at GCAP. Coast Guard infrastructure crisis, maintenance backlog soars to $7 billion as facilities deteriorate. So you've got a Navy issue, you've got a Coast Guard issue. And the reason for this is very simple. Because we allowed the U.S. Merchant Marine to decline, the only customer in U.S. shipyards and repair facilities is the U.S. government. It's sole source. It is just the government. And the government is not one for efficiency. They tend to send ships in late. They keep them longer. They change the orders. Most commercial vessels have to go overseas to go get their maintenance because they can't get into U.S. facilities and therefore have to pay a 50% ad valorem tax on the repair facilities. So all of this amounts to the fact that the U.S. is critically short. Now, if all we cared about was transporting goods back and forth, it's not a big issue. But because we're a naval power and we have this huge Navy and Merchant Marine, huge Navy and Coast Guard that has a global presence, we really need it. And therefore, the commercial, I go back to this in the 80s, is that, John Lehman, over the Secretary of the Navy at the time, proposed what he called the maritime strategy. It wasn't a maritime strategy. It was a naval strategy. It was a great naval strategy. Don't get me wrong. It was a great, strategy to deal with the Soviet Union. But it wasn't a maritime strategy because there was no commercial element to it. He didn't care about it. The problem was we didn't have anyone in the government who did. Then you get this story over at Lloyd's, building on this thing from Rob Wilmington. U.S. shipbuilding revival missing the detail as CMA CGM pledges first new build contracts. So jump down here to his last point, or his second to last point. America's few surviving shipbuilders are tied up with military contracts. True. However, Philly Shipyard is currently building ships. They're finishing the last of the national security multi-mission vessels. These are the training ships for the 5 state maritime academies, and they are on track to build 3 new vessels for Matson for the Alaska trade. But notice here the decline of U.S. merchant shipbuilding was sealed after withdrawal of subsidies in 1981. This is exactly what I was talking about that most people fail to identify, but great job by Rob to identify the key issue there was the end of the subsidies, not the Jones Act. This is Rudolph Sade. He is the head of CMA CGM. Much like many shipping firms, CMA CGM or MSC, it's a privately owned shipping firm. This is the second largest shipping firm in the world, and it's owned by that dude. And the amount of money he made last year, CMA CGM reported profits of $55 billion last year. $55 billion. I'm telling you, if you meet anyone named Aponte or Sade, marry them because they are connected to money if they are connected to these families at all. But Sade has been begging to get into with an office with President Trump, or any president, actually. This came up during the contract renegotiations with the ILA. But Sade was in the Oval Office the other day, and he made this announcement that he is investing $20 billion into the U.S. maritime industry, and it's contained in several components. He said this: over the next 4 years, we will significantly grow our U.S. flag fleet, expand the capacity of key container ports on both coasts, develop state-of-the-art warehousing across the country, and establish a significant air cargo hub in Chicago. We are looking at investing in shipbuilding of container ships. We would also like to increase our U.S. flag vessels from 10 to 30 ships. Now, they operate almost exclusively APL in the Pacific route. Matter of fact, they're the only major U.S. flag container operator that operates on that Pacific route. So bringing them in is really important. They are part of a larger alliance, what's called the Ocean Alliance. And the Ocean Alliance has the most sailings from the Far East, from East Coast of Asia to the West Coast of the United States. Plus, CMA CGM is a big component in the Maritime Security Program. Their ships, this is the Maritime Security Program here, their ships include several large container ships, about 5,500 TEU container ships, and several geared container ships that are designed for moving cargo between several ports. This is the APL website and their U.S. flag fleet. You'll see their ships historically have been named for presidents. This is the American President's Line. They just conducted a ship swap where they took some vessels that were getting old, took them out of the U.S. registry and brought in new ships. You'll see the 7 presidents there, the Adams, the Bush, Carter, Grant, Johnson, Monroe, and Reagan. And then the smaller inter-island ones are the APL ones, Eagle, Islander, and Oceana. So they operate largely on this Pacific route here, but they do have vessel sharing agreements going across the Atlantic. Now, what's Sade said was initially he's going to get ships that are being built in Korea and probably reflag vessels in. So you're talking about going from 10 vessels to 30 vessels. So a 20 ship inclusion, but he's also talking about building ships within the United States and tapping into U.S. shipyard construction. Now, obviously, that's going to take time. Philly is just ramping up to start building the Matson ships. NASSCO has built on the West Coast, and San Diego has built ships for Matson also. They would have to ramp up, or potentially a new shipyard would have to be built to do this. So there's a lot of development that's in the process. I had heard this story was in the works for a long time. I didn't have sources that could confirm it for me, but of all the operators, and there's several big operators that operate U.S. subsidiaries. Maersk has Maersk Lines Limited. Hapag has a Hapag entity in the United States. Wallenius Lines has American roll-on, roll-off carriers. And then there's some pure U.S. shipping firms that operate just solely within the United States. Liberty, for example. There is an opportunity here to see U.S. flag vessels. I think one of the key things that are missing right now from all the legislation I talked about in the beginning is tax incentives and tax rebates for American shippers to use U.S. flag vessels. I had a very interesting conversation the other day with the CEO and president of the Koloa Rum Company. I butchered that the other day. I apologize to him specifically, by the way. I called it the koala. That was very bad. It's not the bear. It's the Koloa Rum Company. And Tom was very polite. We had a great conversation. We talked about some options about if his lawsuit doesn't work out, what to do. It demonstrates, by the way, that you can actually have civil conversations with people you disagree with. I think that's very important. But one of the things that came up in that conversation was, we need more Jones Act carriers. But more importantly, if you're hauling on an exclusive Jones Act trade, for example, Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, Guam, you should be getting rebates to do it, to lower those transportation costs, to make it more affordable for those who have no choice but to use that. We should be incentivizing them to do it. Same thing if you're going to haul cargo across the Pacific, the Atlantic, to the United States. If you haul it on a U.S. flag vessel, you should get some sort of rebate for doing that. You should get something for doing that. I want to see on my Amazon when I order something, it sailed on a U.S. flag ship to get there. That would be great. All right, let's look at the next story. All right, our third story deals with the Panama Canal, and in particularly these stories that came out. So this is from Reuters. Trump hails reclaiming of Panama Canal after BlackRock-led group deals to buy stake. Follow-on story here, CK Hutchinson to sell Panama port assets at center of geopolitical storm. And then this Bloomberg story, the art of the canal deal, how BlackRock brokered Trump win in Panama. So you may remember, I did a video on Panama where we talked about the fact that at both ends of the Panama Canal were Chinese, actually Hong Kong-owned ports. This is Hutchinson Ports. Hutchinson Ports has a global footprint around the world. And at both ends of the Panama Canal, Hutchinson-owned terminals. There's one of two on the Pacific side and then one of three on the Atlantic side. There are a lot of misconceptions that China controlled the Panama Canal. That's not exactly accurate. You had Chinese ports at each end, terminals at each end, but the Chinese did not oversee the operation, but they had a huge influence in it. And President Trump, one of the very first things he did was send Secretary of State Rubio down to Panama when he came in. And what we see here is a U.S. and Swiss deal, because the underlying issue here is that BlackRock, under Goldman Sachs, brokered a deal by which the CK Hutchinson is divesting themselves of a lot of their port interests. This story right here starts getting into it. Bloomberg. Goldman wins rare solo role on blockbuster $19 billion port deal. I will say that there's two different numbers floating around, $19 billion and $22 billion. Story goes on. Goldman is currently the only investment bank working on the sale of CK Hutchinson Holdings ports to a consortium led by BlackRock. The transaction includes two ports on either side of the Panama Canal. Small group of Goldman bankers from Hong Kong to New York, led by senior executives John Waldron and Raghav Mallya, hammered out the transaction in just a couple of weeks. They moved quickly to avoid any leaks. Goes on, data compiled by Bloomberg shows that Goldman has historically been the top advisor to Hutchinson, founded by billionaire Li Ka-shing, one of Hong Kong's most prominent companies. Once a BlackRock consortium showed interest in the port assets, which included the two in Panama and more than 40 others worldwide, there was a rush to sign a memorandum of understanding. And then you get this story, Mike Schiller. Shipping giant MSC set to become world's largest terminal operator in $22.8 billion Hutchinson port deal. In a landmark deal announced on Tuesday, Hutchinson will sell 80% of their stakes to a BlackRock Till consortium, positioning MSC, already the world's largest ocean carrier, to become the global leader in container terminal operations. This deal, the largest in global container terminal sector history, comes during a period of political scrutiny over Chinese influence. Trump had said in a previous joint session, my administration will be reclaiming the Panama Canal, and we've already started doing it. Just today, an American company, BlackRock, announced they are buying both ports around the Panama Canal and lots of other things having to do with the Panama Canal and a couple of other canals. Now, Hutchinson operates 43 marine container terminals outside of China and Hong Kong, from Australia to the UAE. According to Drewry's lead analyst for ports and terminals, Eleanor Hadland, the proposed deal will see MSC leapfrog other leading GTOs, global terminal operators, to secure the top spot in the global terminal operating rankings, which Drewry produces each year, securing the Swiss headquartered container company a truly global network of container terminals. So, it's interesting to note that the Swiss right now, yes, the Swiss, have the largest shipping line in the world, Mediterranean Shipping Company, under the Aponte family, and now they're going to have the largest terminal operation in the world. Yes, the Swiss are in that position. So we don't have to worry about China, but now we got to worry about the Swiss. We should be all right. I mean, they got great chocolate and a really handy pocket knife. I'm not sure what else we need to worry about with the Swiss. So because of the highlight on ports, Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat from Arizona, the only merchant mariner serving in the U.S. Congress right now, has launched a Ports Reporting Act to counter the growing Chinese maritime influence. So much like he did the Ships Act, here we see this Strategic Ports Reporting Act. It is introduced by Kelly, but also with Ted Budd, Republican from North Carolina, my senator, and Rick Scott. This would require the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense to develop a comprehensive global mapping of ports considered vital to U.S. military, diplomatic, economic, and resource exploration interests. I would also say it should include Secretary of Commerce and Secretary of Transportation. The legislation targets the People's Republic of China and their ability to build, buy, or control strategic maritime infrastructure. Senator Budd referenced this in a January Commerce Committee hearing over the Panama Canal. Quote, comprehensive monitoring of PRC activities at domestic and foreign ports that threaten our national interests. So obviously a lot of concern about that Chinese maritime dominance. And you see the Panama Canal selling of those ports by BlackRock to MSC. Again, there's got to be some interest in this too. This is going to make BlackRock, it's going to make Goldman a lot of money in this sale. This is a massive sale. This is tremendous in its scope. And now we see Mediterranean Shipping, who again, largest single shipping container firm in the world, now has a massive interest in controlling container networks. This is very much gearing MSC to becoming a massive player in terms of a monopolistic control. They are not there yet, but they are definitely growing in their hegemony over global shipping. This is what we've seen happen over the last 25 years. You know, if you go back to 2000, the top 10 container liners controlled 50% of the global container capacity. Today, in 2025, the top 10 control 85%. It's definitely seeing consolidation is the issue. I think that's the other issue we got to be concerned about is, yeah, we're worried about China, but we also have to be worried about consolidation. And that's the thing I don't think we're seeing quite yet. All right, let's go to our next story. Story number 4 kind of builds on that with interest in Hong Kong shipping companies. So again, I told you Reuters has put together this group to really delve into shipping, 100%. I do this on the side, but Reuters has the logistics, the assets to do this. And so 2 stories out by Reuters here dealing with this. So number 1, as Trump hails taking back of Panama Canal, Hong Kong Incorporated walks tightrope. So Hong Kong's edge as a financial hub will further erode as the city becomes embroiled in U.S.-China tensions. The British colony is caught in the eye of a storm, underlined by the decision of conglomerate CK Hutchinson to sell its port network, including assets along the Panama Canal, to that consortium led by BlackRock. Hong Kong firms have traditionally been seen as internationally focused and independent of the Chinese state. We have been constantly reviewing our business plan and discussing about our strategy because of the political tension. That's from an executive of a Hong Kong company. However, it's important to note that while Hong Kong has a separate rule of law from China, there was a crackdown in Hong Kong in 2020, and the city has essentially been viewed by many as being under the control of Beijing. Then you have this story. Shipping firms pull back from Hong Kong to skirt U.S.-China risks. So some shipping firms are discreetly, not very discreetly obviously, moving operations out of Hong Kong, taking the vessels off its registry. So the underlying issue here is that Hong Kong companies are very concerned that Chinese authorities may roll in commandeer companies, commandeer ships. So back in September, American businesses were warned about the growing risk of operating in Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong has been a hub for ship owners and brokers, financiers, underwriters, and lawyers, insurance, you name it, for forever. The city is the 8th most flown by ships worldwide, according to Vessel Value. So despite an influx of Chinese-operated ships into the Hong Kong registry, the number of ocean-going vessels flagged in the city fell by 8% to 2,366 in January, down from 2,580 4 years ago. Among the ships that left the registry, 74 were reflagged to either Singapore or the Marshall Islands. Interesting to note that the Marshall Island registry is home-based in the United States, just outside of Washington, D.C. Some 15 tankers and 7 container ships separately left the Hong Kong registry for these flags, according to Vessel Value. The outflow of ships since 2021 marks a reversal for the Hong Kong registry, which saw growth of roughly 400% in the 2 decades following 1997, when the city was turned back over to China from the United Kingdom. Now, according to Basil Caritas, a U.S.-based consultant, and an excellent follow, by the way, if you don't follow him, said Singapore has become the preferred domicile for companies with lesser exposure to Chinese shipping and cargo trade because it offers many efficiencies, including its legal system. A U.S. congressional study in November 2023 stated that cargo ships typically transport 90% of the military equipment needed in overseas wars, and noted that Chinese shipyards had 1,794 large ocean-going ships on order in 2022, compared with 5. Yes, 5. The need for a strong Chinese merchant fleet to help build Chinese maritime power was outlined by President Xi in a Politburo study session in 2013. This coincided, by the way, with the Belt and Road Initiative, which was a large issue that talked about a maritime Silk Road. That is part of the elements that we see from this. So all of this is accounting for this massive expansion of the Chinese fleet. But now we're seeing a retreat out of Hong Kong, which is really interesting to watch. Where does those ships go and those companies go? If Hutchinson is divesting themselves of port interests and we see ships leaving Hong Kong, is this strategy against China working? It seems to be having an impact here. All right, let's go to our last story. All right, for the fifth and final story, let's look at some issues that are out there that have the potential to blow up into major issues, because we're talking about a lot dealing with the United States and its policy and how it's impacting shipping, but there's still more policies even further out there that deserve stories all unto themselves, but there's no way I'm going to cover that. So here we go. Bloomberg story, Trump trade wars sanctions grip already tight heavy oil market. So we're talking about containers a lot, but the oil market is really in a state of flux right now. We're seeing sanctions still being levied against Iran. If for some reason Ukraine, Russia, all of a sudden we get a peace treaty out of there, do the sanctions against Russian oil and diesel go off? What does that mean if that floods out into the market? OPEC is talking about increasing production for April. What happens if the Houthis open up the Red Sea entirely? All of that is playing a big role here. And so obviously those issues should be at the forefront, because again, we're focusing kind of on just a couple of key issues here, but those are really important. Then we have this story that came out. OFAC sanctions reveal Houthis coordinated safe passage for Russian and Chinese ships through the Red Sea. No shit. Seriously. Really. It took OFAC to figure that out? I've been saying that for a year. It's like we finally get... So, again, everybody knew this. Everybody knew the Chinese and the Russians were coordinating their safe passage through the Red Sea. And now OFAC comes out in March of 2025, when this started back in December of 2023, and they say that? Come on. Who is running that? It's like, that is up there with one of the most, here's your sign, stupid things I've seen in a long time. Like, no kidding. Everybody knew this. This is not a secret. Everybody knew this was happening. It was very clear throughout this that this was happening. That the Houthi were basically selling passages to these ships. Again, I'm like really, really shocked. Then we have this story from Ambry. Mystery mine. State actor likely targeting tankers calling at Russian oil ports. Ambry warned. So we've had a series of issues with Russian tankers. And it's pretty clear, by the way, that there is a state actor who's doing this. Now, you've got to go back to Nord Stream and the attacks on that. There is a undeclared naval war going on here. It's pretty clear that we're seeing this. The question is, who are the players in this story? And who are the innocent victims in the story? Because people are getting hit here who may not be specifically targeted. So we have the targeting of underwater pipelines, we have undersea cables, and then we have Russian tankers carrying oil and petroleum out there. This is classic gray zone operations. We've been talking about this for a long time. We should not be surprised by this. I've been talking about this for a long time. I got a lot of people comment on me. It's like, Sal, who blew up Nord Stream? I don't know who the frick blew up Nord Stream because there are 10 different reports out there that point at 10 different groups. Was it the Ukrainians? Was it the Americans? Was it the Russians? Was it the Germans? Was it the Swedes? Was it a batch of dudes scuba diving? I don't know. I don't know who did it because nobody wants to come out with a clear, definitive element. Same way, we don't know what state actor is putting mines on the side of Russians. I got good ideas. I got great ideas. I could give you my ideas, but my ideas are worth crap. Nobody wants my idea. But what we are seeing is lawlessness on the sea, and that is a big issue because when you start having this, it starts increasing insurance rates. And one of the stories that's not being reported anywhere near enough is how much the friggin' insurance companies are making money. If you want to invest in something, invest in maritime insurance companies right now because they're making money by the bucket loads. Just the war risk insurance to sail through the Red Sea is making them money. We just saw a targeting of the port of Odessa by the Russians, and they incidentally hit ships there. It can be clear, if you target a port, you're going to hit a ship. It's right there. It's going to happen. And a lot of people come back and say, the Russians didn't target the ship. Well, no, they targeted the port. And you're going to hit a ship. If you hit a port, you're going to hit a ship. Guaranteed. It's just going to happen. We are seeing, again, the expansion of this gray zone operation out on the high seas, and this is creating problems. The Ambry report is really, really interesting. Ambry does a great job. They're a maritime security consultancy. They do an excellent job. There's some good follows of them on LinkedIn with their staff. Really, really need to kind of follow them in many ways. I don't know why I haven't gotten a job offer from Ambry. I think I'd be a great maritime security consultant. I really do. But anyway, let's keep moving. Reuters story, U.S. mulling plan to intercept Iranian tankers at sea as exports surge. Okay, I see no problem with that whatsoever. What could possibly go wrong with the U.S. stopping Iranian tankers on the high seas? I can't see that blowing up in our face at all. There's no potential for that. U.S. has got to figure out what's our policy with Iran and the exporting of oil from Iran. This is an issue. I don't know where we're at on this. I really don't, because we keep going back and forth on these issues. This is the Trump administration planning this. This is not coming out of left field. Trump has announced that he's vowing to restore a maximum pressure campaign against the Iranians. And if you're going to do a maximum pressure campaign against them, targeting their oil tankers is one way to do it. Now, we've done it in the past. We've put leverage against ships carrying Iranian oil that are private companies. So what we do is we go into a private oil company, and usually in Greece, and we leverage them as like, hey, how about diverting your ship and sailing it to the United States or some other port, and we're going to take that oil off. And that has always worked out great. It hasn't. It really hasn't. And what the Iranians have done is responded back. For example, the ship that we had do that, go all the way to Houston, Texas, sit there for months because nobody wanted to touch the friggin' oil. They renamed the ship, sail it back to the Persian Gulf, and the Iranians seized it. Yes, the Iranians just took the ship. They could care less what you rename it. They're going to take the ship. So this has got the potential here to escalate into a great fight in the Persian Gulf. And then we have this story. House committee leaders slammed the EU's TikTok campaign to undermine the Jones Act. So great story that came out. showing how the EU, consulting with some American think tanks, you know who you are, about launching an anti-Jones Act campaign. Who in the United States, what think tank would be interested in an anti-Jones Act campaign? I don't have an idea of what company that could be. The controversy centers around a recently discovered Foreign Agents Registration Act FARA filing, which was first reported by G-Captain. It revealed the EU's plan to finance the creation of, quote, funny but informative, unquote, TikTok-style videos aimed at criticizing the Jones Act, a cornerstone of American maritime law. Social media about shipping and the Jones Act, that will never take off at all. No one would tune in and watch anything like that. I'm surprised I didn't get the call from the EU to do it. I really am. I mean, what do I got to do? I've got some TikToks out there, not the greatest, but I can do it. I guarantee you it'll be better than what this group puts together on it. I'm just amazed at how bad the anti-Jones Act lobby is at lobbying this. I really do. I don't understand the money that is spent on it, and what have you gotten in return? I just question it all the time. So when questioned about the filing, an EU spokesman defended their efforts. The European Union has long conducted outreach, that's called lobbying, in the United States on the question of market access for various maritime services. The committee emphasized that the Jones Act remains vital to U.S. commercial shipbuilding, supply chain stability, and national security interests. The committee leaders emphasized, quote, the constructive dialogue and collaboration, not TikTok videos, is a far better way for the EU and the United States to address international matters of concern while respecting the sovereignty and security interests of both parties. Seriously, I just had a pleasant conversation with the president of the Koala Rum Company, who I did a video on where I critiqued his filing against the port preference clause. It was civil. It was fun. I think I'm getting a bottle of rum out of it. I think it was great. I think it was very productive. And, I gave him my opinion, my insight, because I will give opinion and insight. I don't think the Jones Act is the end-all, be-all. I really don't. I think it needs reform desperately. But I think attacking it through TikTok-style videos is not the way to do it. I just don't. That's going to be a meme. That's going to come back and haunt me, that little move right there. I just don't think that's the way to do it. So, 5 stories. Wow. Let's kind of take a moment here. That's a lot of ship. It's a lot of ship happening. Gave you the recount there of all the things going on in the United States. Ships Act, Tariff, the U.S. Trade Representative, and now the executive order creating the Office of Shipbuilding with their Make Shipbuilding Great Again in the United States. We talked about CMA CGM investing $20 billion in the United States, including tripling the size of their U.S. flagged fleet. We talked about the Panama Canal and Hutchinson selling their port interests over to BlackRock and MSC. That's major. Again, Hutchinson is in Hong Kong. That rolls into the 4th story there, where Hong Kong is divesting itself of some of its shipping firms, moving them overseas and reflagging into Singapore and the Marshall Islands. This may be also why China may be starting a campaign against some of the open registries, particularly the Marshall Islands and potentially Liberia. And then finally, all these issues that I just summarized here, all of these have the potential to come back and be major. Again, the best way to keep up with that is to subscribe and like the channel. If you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the channel. Click the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. And if you are a subscriber, do me a favor, just check. YouTube has this weird habit of unsubscribing people. I keep hearing that from people, and so please just, double check, make sure you're still subscribed. If you can, support the page. How do you do it? Well, you can give it a big thumbs up, you can share it across social media, and you can support it by contributing to the page. How do you contribute? You hit that super thanks button right there down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a patron of the channel monthly or yearly. I appreciate everybody tuning in. I'm going to go take a nap. I need to kind of settle back down, because it's been a week, and I got a feeling that next week is going to be that way too. Hey, heading on a trip next week, heading up to Minneapolis and then down to Wichita to give a talk on Wednesday and Thursday next week. Really excited. What you got here is going to be a boiled down version of what I'm doing in there, kind of really summarizing where we're at, what is going on with shipping. When I named this channel, I didn't realize how appropriate the name was. But just knowing what's going on with shipping is a lot, and it keeps me busy. Until the next episode, this is Sal, calming down and signing off.